Like the Ottoman Empire, the Russian Empire lagged far behind Western European powers in both economic and military might. Determined to preserve Russia's status as a great power, the Tsarist government embarked on a program of reform. These reforms came as a result of devastating losses to industrialized powers. The first of these wars began with Russia's attempt to dominate the Ottoman Empire and ended in a crushing defeat on the Crimean Peninsula in 1856. During the early 19th century, the Russian Empire expanded in three directions: east into Manchuria, south into the Caucasus and Central Asia, and southwest towards the Mediterranean. Expanding southwest led to confrontation with the Ottoman Empire over the Balkans. After defeating Turkish forces in 1829, Russia tried to establish a protectorate over the weakening Ottoman Empire. This expansive effort threatened to upset the balance of power in Europe, which led to a military conflict between Russia and a coalition including Britain, France, the Kingdom of Sardinia, and the Ottoman Empire. The Crimean War clearly revealed the weakness of the Russian Empire, which could hold its own against Ottoman and Chinese king forces, but not against the industrial powers of Western Europe. Military defeat compelled the Tsarist autocracy to reevaluate the Russian social order and undertake an extensive restructuring program. The key to social reform in Russia was the emancipation of the serfs by Alexander II in 1861. Although serfdom was supported by the nobility, many believed it had become an obstacle to economic development and a viable state. Besides being economically inefficient, serfdom was a source of rural instability and peasant revolt. When the serfs were given their freedom, they had their labor obligations gradually canceled and gained opportunities to become landowners. But the peasants won few political rights, and they had to pay a redemption tax for most of the lands that they received. A few peasants prospered and improved their position as a result of emancipation, but most found themselves in debt for the rest of their lives, a source of alienation and radicalization. Emancipation resulted in little, if any, increase in agricultural production. Other important reforms came in the wake of the serfs' emancipation. To deal with the local issues of health, education, and welfare, the government created district assemblies, or zemstvos, in 1864. Although all classes, including peasants, elected representatives to these assemblies, the zemstvos remained subordinate to Tsarist authority, which retained exclusive authority over national issues, and the landowning nobility, which possessed a disproportionately large share of both votes and seats. Legal reforms were more successful, however. The revision of the judiciary system in 1864 created a system of law courts based on Western European models, which included independent judges and a system of appellate courts. Social and political reform coincided with industrialization in 19th century Russia. The prime mover behind Russian industrialization was Count Sergei Witte, Minister of Finance from 1892 to 1903. His goal was to remove the unfavorable conditions which hamper the economic development of the country, and to kindle a healthy spirit of enterprise. The centerpiece of his industrial policy was an ambitious program of railway construction, which linked the far-flung regions of the Russian Empire and also stimulated the development of other industries. Most important of these new lines was the Trans-Siberian Railway, which opened Siberia to a large-scale settlement, exploitation, and industrialization. To raise domestic capital for industry, Witte remodeled the state bank and encouraged the establishment of savings banks. Witte supported the infant industries, with high protective tariffs, while also securing large foreign loans from Western Europe to finance industrialization. His plan worked. French and Belgian capital played a key role in developing the steel and coal industries, and the British funds supported a booming petroleum industry in the Caucasus. Industrialization in Russia was met with peasant rebellions and strikes by industrialized workers unwilling to tolerate the low standard of living. Industrial growth began to generate an urban working class, which endured conditions similar to those experienced by workers in other societies during the early stages of industrialization. Employers kept wages of overworked and poorly housed workers at the barest minimum. The government prohibited the formation of trade unions and outlawed strikes, which continued to occur in spite of the restrictions. Economic exploitation and the lack of political freedom made workers increasingly receptive to revolutionary propaganda, and underground movements soon developed among them. Not everyone was dissatisfied with the results of the intensified industrialization. Besides foreign investors, a growing Russian business class benefited from government policy that protected domestic industries and its profits. During the last 3 decades of the 19th century, anti-government protests and revolutionary activity increased. Social tensions arising from industrialization fueled protests by groups whose aims became increasingly radical. This in turn led to the government attempting to repress these radicals. Peasants seethed with discontent because they had little or no land, and increasingly mobile dissidents spread their rebellious ideas between industrial cities. Between 1873 and 1876, hundreds of anarchists and other radicals traveled to rural areas to enlighten and rouse the peasantry. At the center of the opposition were the university students and a class of intellectuals collectively known as the intelligentsia. They advocated socialism and anarchism. Frightened by manifestations of radicalism, Tsarist authorities resorted to repression. They censored publications and sent secret police to infiltrate and break up dissident organizations. Repression, however, only radicalized revolutionaries further and encouraged them to engage in conspiratorial activities. In the Baltic provinces, Poland, the Ukraine, Georgia, and Central Asia, dissidents opposed the Tsarist autocracy on ethnic as well as political and social grounds. Tsarist officials responded with a heavy-handed program of Russification to repress the use of languages other than the Russian, and to restrict educational opportunities to those loyal to the Tsarist state. Throughout the Russian Empire, Jews were targets of suspicion, and Tsarist authorities tolerated frequent pogroms by subjects jealous of their Jewish neighbors' success in business affairs. In 1876, a recently formed group called the Land and Freedom Party began to promote the assassination of prominent officials as a means to pressure the government into political reform. In 1879, a terrorist faction of the party, the People's Will, resolved to assassinate Alexander II. After several unsuccessful attempts on the man who had emancipated the serfs and launched a program of political and social reform, an assassin exploded a bomb under Alexander's carriage in 1881. The first blast did little damage, but as Alexander inspected his carriage, a second and more powerful explosion killed the reforming Tsar. The attack brought an era of reform to an end and prompted the Tsarist autocracy to adopt an uncompromising policy of repression. In 1894, Tsar Nicholas II ascended to the throne. A well-intentioned but weak ruler, Nicholas championed oppression and police control. To deflect attention from domestic issues, the Tsar's government embarked on an expansionist venture into East Asia. Russian designs on Korea and Manchuria clashed with similar Japanese intentions, leading to a rivalry that ended in war. The Russo-Japanese War began with a Japanese surprise attack on the Russian naval squadron in Port Arthur in February of 1904, and ended in May of 1905 with the destruction of the Russian Navy. Russian military defeats brought to a head simmering political and social discontent and triggered widespread disturbances. In January of 1905, a group of workers marched on the Tsar's Winter Palace in St. Petersburg to petition Nicholas for a popularly elected assembly and other political concessions. Government troops met the petitioners with rifle fire, killing 130. The news of this Bloody Sunday massacre caused an angry uproar throughout the empire that culminated in labor unrest, peasant insurrections, student demonstrations, and mutinies in both the army and the navy. Organizing themselves at the village level, peasants seized the property of their landlords. Urban workers created new councils known as Soviets to organize strikes and negotiate with employers and government authorities. Revolutionary turmoil paralyzed Russian cities and forced the government to make concessions. The Tsar reluctantly consented and permitted the establishment of the Duma, Russia's first parliamentary institution. The creation of the Duma did not end the unrest. Between 1905 and 1907, disorder continued, and violence flared, especially in the Baltic provinces, Poland, the Ukraine, Georgia, and Central Asia, where ethnic tensions added to revolutionary sentiments. Through bloody reprisals, the government eventually restored order, but the hour was late for the Romanov dynasty.